Welcome to Learning to Glow, a show about wellness, skin health, and self-development. I'm your host, Jess. I'm a mom, entrepreneur, and skincare expert. I'm so excited to share tips on how to achieve healthy skin and bring amazing guests in the field of health, fitness, aging gracefully, and personal growth. Let's explore all different ways we can take care of ourselves as women, both inside and out, to truly shine. So let's get glowing. Hello, and thank you so much for being here today on the Learning to Glow podcast. We have such a special episode with Leigh Ann, Lindsey, who is the founder and practitioner at the Crescent, and we are going to be talking about the EVOX Therapy modality. Leigh Ann supports clients in person and remotely through one-on-one neuro-transformational coaching and EVOX Therapy, which is voice mapping and biofeedback technology. We really get into this, and if you're like me and you've never heard about it, you're in for a treat, so stay tuned. Through both, Leigh Ann helps clients identify and release the subconscious barriers, keeping them stuck in limiting patterns so that clients can uplevel and create more joy, peace, and alignment in any area of their life, such as relationships, career, athletics. If you have never heard of EVOX, we really break it down and kind of get into the 101. She also shares her story of being diagnosed with breast cancer and through her treatment, how she found this modality and how it really resonated with her. She used it to help her healing process and found it so impactful that she decided to become a practitioner herself. And she shares her love of EVOX with others and helps them in her own practice. You will love Leigh Ann. She was so wonderful to have on the show. I loved her knowledge in a topic that we have not discussed here. It's brand new to me. You can check out Leigh Ann on Instagram. She is at the Crescent, and her other account that she has, which is at Leigh Ann Lindsey, and her website is thecrescent.com. I'll have everything linked so that you can just go to the show notes and you don't have to type it in yourself. She is so amazing. I really hope you love this episode. She was so kind enough to offer my listeners a code. So it's good for a one-time use, 20% off your first EVOX or neuro-transformational life coaching session with her. Use code SimplyJess when you check out at the website. And if you have any questions, because this may be new to some of you, please send her a message. Check out her website. There's a lot of information. And she has her own podcast, which is really interesting. And I've been listening to it. It's how I found her. I've actually had my own EVOX therapy session, and I can tell you that I absolutely loved it. I got a lot out of it. She is so wonderful. So definitely check her out. You'll want to after you listen to this episode. And also thank you to all of you who have shared this podcast. I really appreciate it. And if you enjoy this episode, please share it with someone that you think would enjoy it. Don't forget to subscribe. It's really easy to do. You just go, when you're in Apple Podcasts, there's a little plus sign, and that will just subscribe you so that when a new episode is released, it just is downloaded into your app. So you never miss an episode. It also really helps with the show. So helping to get the word out is definitely my goal. Thank you to all of you who have shared it, subscribed, and left me a review. I just so appreciate it. Without further ado, here is Leigh Ann. I hope you really enjoy this episode. And here we go. Today we have Leigh Ann, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I'm so excited to be here. This is going to be such a fun time.
So excited that you're here. And for my listeners who don't know you, if you could just give us a little description of yourself, a little background, what you do, all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I'll give you the brief one, and then I know we're going to dive into it as we go. So I have a mental health and emotional wellness practice here in Dana Point, California, where I work with clients in person and remotely. I do something called EVOX Therapy, which is a type of biofeedback and voice mapping technology. And really the overarch of what I do is working with clients to help them identify what are the emotional and subconscious blocks that are keeping me from creating the life that I want, whether it's finding more peace, more clarity, whether it's breaking patterns that we feel we've been stuck in. And so I use EVOX Therapy to help us get into the subconscious. That's a really, really big part of what I do, is looking at emotional wellness and emotional healing through the lens of the subconscious. And then I use that tool, the EVOX therapy, to bring in more of a somatic approach as well, because, and I know we're going to dive into this a lot more of what it is and what it does, but that I think is kind of the one-liner.
That's perfect. Yeah. And it's such I feel like, unique thing to specialize in. And it's so interesting. So I'm so curious how you came about this, and how did you find yourself being a specialist in this type of therapy? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll take it back even all the way back to my undergrad, because I've always been interested in health and more holistic alternative wellness. My undergrad was in public health. I worked as a research assistant. But and even after graduating, I was like, I haven't found the thing that I feel like I could commit my life to and commit my time to, that I know I can help people through. That was always a big, big thing. I really wanted to support people in their own growth. Fast forward to 2020. I was, between graduating in 2020, I graduated in 2016. I just doing odd jobs, kind of looking for the thing that really was like a full body yes for me to do. 2020 hits. We all know what happened globally that year. And pretty much in the series of a week, my whole life fell apart. On the same day, I lost my job because of COVID. I received a breast cancer diagnosis. The world shut down. And within that same week, me and my fiance broke up. So I had moved out. I was staying in an Airbnb. Just every single aspect of my life was completely shattered. And that was the beginning of a huge rebuild, a huge up level. But a long story short, as part of the breast cancer treatment that I was doing, I'm so blessed and lucky to have found Dr. Leigh Ann and the Cancer Center for Healing here in Orange County, California. And they take such an integrative, full being approach to healing. And one of the modalities or treatments that is part of their cancer process with all of their patients is EVOX therapy. Because Dr. Keneally, and I'm very much of the same mindset, really believes that the emotional component to cancer cannot be overlooked. Not just let's support ourselves as we go through this heavy diagnosis and this news and now all the treatments, present day support, but also, are there unresolved experiences? Are there repressed emotions that maybe contributed to the dis-ease within my body from the first place? So I was doing EVOX there, and it was so life-changing and impactful for me. I have always been interested and fascinated by emotional wellness. I remember at 10 years old journaling, like, why did I react to this person in this way? What was going on inside of me? So I already did so much of that introspection, but I had never, tried therapy and EMDR and many different emotional wellness tools, and nothing had really resonated with me or been so impactful that I was like, oh, I'd like to use this resource again. And so when it came to EVOX, it was just like hyper speed to healing and epiphanies and breakthroughs and changes in my behavior. And I was, in the thick of so many treatments and tests, and I ultimately ended up having surgery for the tumor. And so I wasn't at that time thinking, oh, maybe this is something I could do. I was just loving it so much and continuing to go back and do EVOX sessions there at the center. And so, but then in 2021, I was through the bulk of my treatments. I was doing really well. Thankfully, my cancer, we had caught it super early. So I didn't need to do chemo and radiation. So it was a little less intense than maybe what most people experience. Fast forward to 2021, for some reason, it just hit me like, whoa, I think this is the tool I was meant to use. I could actually do this. I could actually offer this to people. And I think that was January. And at that time I was thinking, okay, maybe within a year or 2 years, I can get something off the ground and get this going. And I really have to give so much credit to my husband, Omid, because he pushes me. He really does, and encourages me, inspires me, and supports me. And he was like, no, let's do this. Let's get this going. And so what was going to be something that was maybe coming in 2023, where we are now, from January, within 2 months, I had the business founded. I'd had the certification. I'd purchased the technology, gone through all the training. And then by June of 2021, I had actually launched the business and was starting to take clients. So that's the longer story there.
That's amazing. You just resonated with it so much that you were just like, this is it. It's such an amazing thing that you found it and that it worked for you in such a way. I actually just did a podcast with this woman named Christina, and she was suffering from breast implant illness and Lyme disease and was at with Dr. Keneally. Like that episode just aired today.
Oh
And
my
so
gosh.
it's the first time I had ever heard of her before, Christina, and then now you. So that's something that they actually use as part of their treatment plans for cancer patients then.
Yes. Almost all, it's something Keneally recommends for everyone there. Of course, it's the patient's choice whether they
Sure.
want to book and schedule that modality, but I would say probably 95% of the patients there are doing EVOX therapy in some capacity. They might not be continuing, but they might do a round of EVOX therapy. And I actually cover their EVOX sessions there on occasion when their EVOX practitioner is out. And I might start to be there one day a week, just working with patients there, just so they have even more. Right now, they only have one EVOX practitioner there, and they are booked solid. I mean, they're booked so far out. So that will be really exciting for me because it's very full circle to have started there as a patient, now coming back 3 years later as a practitioner is super, super special.
Oh, I have goosebumps. That's amazing. I love that story. I'm going to ask the next question, which probably people who haven't heard of EVOX are very curious to know. What is EVOX? And obviously this is helping with that emotional wellness piece that you mentioned earlier, which I think when you're dealing with something as serious as cancer, or like my guest, Christina, the amount of illness and life change, because one day she was a healthy young woman and the next day she wasn't. So it sounds like it has that emotional wellness piece, but can you explain to us what, like a 101, what is EVOX? How does it work and all of that?
Yeah. And I'll start with explaining the technology, and then I'll touch on how I use it and what I'm using in conjunction with it.
Perfect.
But just to give you the basics of what is EVOX technology, if I were to use the full definition, it's officially called EVOX Perception Reframing Technology. And it was created by Dr. Von Cook. So if anyone wants to look into that a little bit more, and there's plenty of resources on my website as well. But the gist of the technology is there's really two things involved. So the first is something called voice mapping, and then the second is biofeedback. So what we're doing with voice mapping is we know all day long, whenever we're talking, there are measurable tones in our voice that correlate to emotions. So with voice mapping, what we're doing is the client will come in, we'll chat. Once we've identified a topic that we want to work through, we'll put some headphones on. And as the client is talking about the topic, we're actually measuring the tones in the voice to see what emotions are imbalanced in relation to the topic we're discussing. And we'll literally have a graph with colors, because you've tried it out.
That's right.
Of colors showing what emotions are imbalanced, what intensity, what emotions are the highest in relation to this topic. And then the second piece of that is the biofeedback, where we are outputting frequencies into the body that have been found to help support the balancing and the release of those emotions. So there's three main ways I use EVOX in my practice, and I'll touch on all the three of those briefly. The first is it has been amazing for fears and phobias. It really is. Even for me, it's still shocking. I'll have someone come in. I had a 70-plus-year-old client come in who had a phobia of driving over bridges. She couldn't drive over bridges because she had had an accident on a bridge that was incredibly traumatizing. And within 3 EVOX sessions, basically 3 weeks, she was able to drive over bridges again. On occasion, I work with kids. I had a 10-year-old, a phobia of needles, another woman who had a phobia of flying on airplanes and claustrophobia. Usually within 3 to 5 sessions, these phobias are being cleared, which is phenomenal, especially for individuals who have been dealing with a phobia for years and years. To get that freedom back is huge. So that's one of the main categories or areas that I use it for. The second is more acute stress. Maybe there was a loss in the family. Maybe I just got a health diagnosis. Maybe I have a big life change or career change coming up, or just something happened that I know isn't a chronic issue, but I just like a little bit of extra support. to ride this wave. Maybe I just need a little bit more peace. Maybe I need a little bit more clarity on the situation. And it can be wonderful for helping soothe the emotions, soothe the inner turbulence in some of those times. And then also, if we do need clarity, helping that clarity come up for us of what do I need to do? What steps do I need to take? Is there something I need to let go of? Is there something I need to bring in? And then the third area, which I use it for, and this is the category that I tend to use it for most, is more chronic patterns that we see. And I like to separate these into emotional patterns and then behavioral patterns. So an emotional pattern might be something like, I have a chronic emotional pattern of anxiety or sadness or anger or fear. And behavioral patterns can really run the gambit. I might have a behavioral pattern of soothing with food or some kind of addiction, or a pattern of, I just can't seem to set boundaries with people. I constantly let myself get taken advantage of. It can run the gambit. There's so many different things here. Maybe it's a pattern of, I beat myself up. I'm just super hard on myself emotionally, and that really brings me down. And so what we're doing with EVOX therapy and the lens that I bring to that is, what is going on in my subconscious that's keeping me stuck in these patterns? Because I really do believe the subconscious is only ever trying to protect us. And by the way, just for those who don't know, 80 to 95% of the decisions we make in a day are made by the subconscious brain. And I like to explain this because so often, right, we have our conscious brain and then we have our subconscious brain. And oftentimes I think we feel like, no, I'm confident in this area. No, I can do this thing. And it doesn't click that maybe our subconscious beliefs might be in conflict with our conscious beliefs. But what I like to say is, just because we consciously know something doesn't mean we're able to do it. I think we've all been in places where I know I shouldn't, be dating these toxic people. And yet I still keep doing it. I know I should maybe care for my body more with more movement or better food, but I just can't seem to get myself to do it. I think so many of us have those things. It's like, consciously, we know what we should be doing, or we know what we shouldn't be doing anymore. But that doesn't, like, we're still stuck. No matter how many times I try, no matter how much quote unquote discipline I try and bring into my life, I just can't seem to make growth in those areas. Or I do make growth, but it's very yo-yo-y. I go up and down and I keep falling back into the old pattern. And so when I see either one of those things, for me, that's a sign that there's a conscious, subconscious misalignment. Something in the subconscious is pulling us back into that pattern or keeping us stuck in that pattern. And when we can identify what's going on down there, then we can identify it, clear it, and let it go. And we can shift into whatever the new pattern is, the new thought process, with so much more ease. It's not about discipline, this or that. And I get so passionate about this because I think a lot of us do start to feel like, oh, maybe I'm just lazy. Maybe something's just broken inside of me. Why can't I do this? Why can't I just change this? I know I should, but I can't seem to do it. And then we start to beat ourselves up, and then we start to feel less than, or like something's wrong with us. And I'm telling you, 9.8 times out of 10, it's not that you're not disciplined enough. It's not that something's broken inside you. It's not that your mind, body, or spirit is trying to sabotage you. It's that it's actually trying to protect you. It's just working on old programming. Pause there.
Oh, yeah. I love that. And it sounds like what you're doing in the sessions is trying to bring those subconscious thoughts more to the surface so that the client can know what's going on down there and bring it to the conscious, so they can maybe get off autopilot. Is autopilot a good word for like kind of the subconscious? And we're doing these behaviors or having these actions without thinking about them so much, because it's just kind of like a pattern that is just unconscious a lot of the time.
I think autopilot is definitely a word we could use. I might even say it's something like, it's a rule book. The subconscious is the rule book of life that was created usually between the ages of 0 to 7. And so what's happening is we are living our adult lives at 30, 40, 50, 60, etc., with an outdated rule book, with outdated guidelines. And so being able to first of all, bring awareness to that, because a lot of those things are unconscious. A lot of those beliefs are unconscious. And so bringing awareness to those beliefs is a big one. I think a lot of us are stuck in patterns maybe we're not even aware of, but then a lot of us are stuck in patterns that we're aware of, but we don't know why or where it's coming from. And so when we can bring awareness to what's going on in the subconscious, that's the first piece. Then the continued work going forward is, okay, what is the new belief I want to integrate into my subconscious? Our brain is just looping. A lot of these patterns is because our neural pathways have just been looping and looping on beliefs and repressed emotions and old experiences for so many years. And that is where I think EVOX as a technology is really, really impactful in this. The subconscious and the limiting beliefs, that's the lens that I specifically bring to my practice and the work that I do. EVOX doesn't necessarily, show me on the screen what their limiting beliefs are. That's the work I'm doing and the questions we're asking in a session to be able to let those surface and identify them. What I have seen anecdotally in my experience with EVOX is that I really do believe it's helping us break those old neural pathways that are looping on the old beliefs, that are looping on repressed emotions and unresolved experiences. And it makes the mind so much more neuroplastic so that we can integrate whatever the new is with much, much more ease. The other piece that I love about EVOX so much is that it's very regulating for the nervous system. And this is huge because, again, we'll talk about this towards the end. I've also introduced a new service, which is the neuro-transformational life coaching. And that's face-to-face. We're chatting, we're talking, we're identifying patterns, we're identifying limiting beliefs and what do I need to shift into? What's keeping me from getting there? But what EVOX brings to the table is those two things, the neural pathways and helping us break those, and then also that nervous system regulation. Because so often, when we're working through some of these things, sometimes triggering things do come up. Sometimes, unresolved emotions do come up, and that can be very triggering. The tricky thing about it is once we get triggered, literally parts of our brain shut down. We're not able to think and process as clearly. And this is one of the reasons why I think sometimes just conventional talk therapy can have very slow progress. Although I'm not knocking it, I absolutely think there's a place for it. I think it can be life-changing. I think it can be life-saving. However, when we're talking about triggering things and our brain shuts down, I think it makes it so much harder to get clarity, to identify what's going on beneath the surface. With EVOX, what I find is clients will come in and they'll tell me, oh my gosh, I feel so much peace when I'm talking about this thing that normally when I discuss, I feel so triggered and so anxious, maybe even panicked around. They're able to discuss things and have such a sense of calm and peace around it. And then I like to call it the EVOX Zen, because again, 9 out of 10 clients when they leave a session are like, oh my gosh, I feel so much lighter. I feel so calm. I feel so at peace. And that's huge because I don't know if you've experienced it. I have definitely experienced leaving a therapy session and just feeling so activated and dysregulated and triggered. And then you kind of have to go back to your life like, oh my gosh, okay, what do I do with this?
Okay, I have so many things that I'm thinking of as you're speaking. First of all, I think, yes, with the therapy, I'm a big proponent of it too. And I studied psychology in college. I was going to be a psychologist. So I do think there's a place, but I have had that experience where I've left angry and I'm like, wait, yeah, this isn't the way I want to feel right now. But so personally after having the EVOX, that was the word I described. I felt lighter afterwards. And I did feel that sense of peace afterwards. And I also want to talk about the time as far as like the results that you can get, sometimes 3 to 5 sessions. And after my first session, I had a breakthrough. That was one session. And so I was just blown away at that. The feeling that I had, the fact that you can kind of get to a deeper place in a short amount of time, I thought was amazing.
Mm-hmm. It is the reason, probably one of the biggest reasons why like I said, I had tried prior to discovering EVOX so many different emotional support techniques, and there's many, and it doesn't mean there's not a place for them.
Hmm.
I had never found a resource or a tool that had such impactful shifts so quickly. Almost everyone who comes in, even in their first session, they're having major epiphanies, major breakthroughs. And then we're continuing the work because it's not a magic pill, right? But we're continuing the work to then, usually within one session, yes, we're having those breakthroughs, we're having epiphanies. Usually within, I'd say, 4 to 8 sessions, whatever the pattern is that they're coming in for, we're seeing dramatic shifts in that. And if you think about that, ideally, I like to do them on a weekly basis. If you think about that, 4 to 8 sessions, that's basically 1 to 2 months. If in 1 to 2 months, you can see dramatic shifts in a pattern that you might have been struggling with for 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, 60 years with some of my clients, that's pretty huge, I think. And that's just what gets me so excited is it doesn't have to take so long. The emotional healing doesn't have to take so long. It doesn't have to be so triggering and so slow paced. And that shifts. I think this is one of the other things that blows me away and blows clients away. And you might have experienced this. The shifts that are happening come with such ease. It's almost like we don't even need to have this intensity and this discipline and this like white knuckling to try and make the change happen, because we've gotten into the subconscious and started to release some of the emotional root causes. The brain's like, oh, I don't need this anymore. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm all in. Let's shift. Let's change into this new thing we're wanting to integrate.
That is amazing. So maybe you could walk us through, what does it look like to have a session with you? And like, what does it look like for the client, somebody who's never come in before? And maybe you can paint a picture of that.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. So usually first sessions are 90 minutes. They're an hour and a half, which is very unusual. No one else I know is doing this, but I really love to be able to spend a good amount of time together and have ample time to explain the technology, connect a little bit, get to know each other, and then get into the session. So initial sessions usually will start off with just a brief introduction. I'll explain the technology, kind of like what I did here today on the podcast, talk to them about how I use it. I always explain a little bit about the subconscious. Again, what I shared on this podcast, why the subconscious, why that's a lens that I bring to the table and why I think that's so important. But then usually we'll chat about, hey, how do you hope this can support you? Oftentimes I'm asking, is there a pattern you feel stuck in? If so, what might that be? What might those be? Or if there's not necessarily a pattern, it might be, is there an area in your life that you would like a little bit more peace or clarity around? Maybe you don't have this big chronic pattern that you're dealing with, but maybe there's something more acute going on that you're like, yeah, it's really causing a lot of turbulence. I'd like a little more peace, or I just need a little bit of clarity on this topic. I'm not sure which direction to go in. So that's what we spend a fair amount of time chatting about. What's going to be the most impactful for you? Oftentimes I like to ask the question of, hey, let's say you were to do 4 sessions in a row. A month from now, if something could be dramatically better in your life, what would that be? And oftentimes that also brings a lot up for them. Like, oh, when you put it that way, okay, here's what I want to change ASAP. And so we start by identifying that. And once we get clear on that, we might puzzle out that pattern a little bit. It's helpful for me to be able to understand, for example, let's say someone comes in with a pattern of anxiety or chronic stress. What that looks like for me versus what that looks like for them can be completely different. So I like to understand, how does that affect you? How does that manifest in your day-to-day life? Does that look like chronic monkey brain that then leads to procrastination, that then leads to you not being able to get things done that you need to? Does it look like you being super irritable with your coworkers or your family? Does it look like you staying up super late and not getting into bed in time? So I like to use that word, we puzzle out the pattern to get a better sense of what is it and how's it showing up? And also, what is the potentially negative or limiting ripple effect of this pattern on my life? And then once we've got all of that identified, that's where we get into the EVOX session, and I'll explain the flow of that with them. We get our headset on, we get our hand on the hand cradle, and we start to work through, as we go through the rounds in EVOX, okay, what might be some of the subconscious beliefs, repressed emotions, what might be some of the core experiences that are contributing to this pattern. And then usually the EVOX part of the session is about 45 minutes to an hour. And once we're done in initial sessions, we go over the EVOX report and identify, here are some of the key emotions that are coming up for you. And then there's almost always some kind of integration item that I like to call it, which is kind of the take home. It might just be a question that they're going to sit with and mull over a little bit more. There might actually be some kind of action item that we agree upon that they're going to integrate and start to play with over the next week in between sessions. But that's the general flow of first-time client sessions.
Yeah. And then the first, so it's so interesting too, when you mentioned earlier that from 0 to 7 is when a lot of these things kind of take place in the brain, that you have, for me personally, when I saw you, an issue that I'm dealing with today. And then I could go back in time and be like, oh, like so many things clicked for me where I was like, that makes sense why this is happening now. I wouldn't have thought about that without the questions and the way that you kind of framed it, because that was something that was like a big epiphany for me during our session, because I was like, oh, wow, that is not something I would have ever like kind of put 2 and 2 together. And then it just gives, I think too, it kind of gives you compassion for what you're dealing with. Like you're not, it kind of switches from, why am I doing this? Like, this is a terrible thing, to, oh, I get it. And I understand. And it's okay.
Yeah. I feel like it's the difference between my mind, body, spirit is my enemy and I'm trying to whip it into shape, versus my mind, body, spirit is my friend that I'm holding her hand and walking her forward from that place of empathy. No, that is such a huge piece. And I'm so glad you highlight that, because like I said at the beginning, our mind, body, spirit is only ever trying to protect us. But between the ages of 0 to 7, 0 to 14, if we're being generous, we're sponges. We are just absorbing, and we are unconsciously making conclusions about ourselves, about life, about the world, about relationships, based on what we're perceiving. And so the dynamics that we're surrounded by, how our parents treat us, how they treat each other, and maybe not even parents, maybe just caretakers. Not all of us had quote unquote parents. How our caretakers are treating us, how they're treating each other, their expectations, what is being communicated to me explicitly, what is being communicated implicitly. And through all of that, our little brains are just making instant conclusions. I'll give you an example from my own experience that might make it a little more clear. When I first started with EVOX, actually, when I was at the center, one of the epiphanies that came up for me is, most of my life, I had felt like I can't find my people. I just can't find anyone that I really want to get close to. And no one really seems to want to get close to me. And then I had this epiphany in a session one time where I was like, you know what? I realized my mom, what I had observed growing up is my mom never really expressed herself. She was very closed off. And I think as a child, what I picked up from that is, oh, if mom doesn't think it's safe to be herself and be known by others, it must not be safe for me either. And vice versa. My father, on the other hand, was very uninterested, for lack of a better word, didn't try and get to know us, was not very involved in our lives. And so I had 2 different messages from each parent. From my mom, it was, it's not safe to be known. It's not safe to be seen. And from my dad, it was, if my dad's not even interested in knowing me, then no one else would be.
Mm.
And both of those beliefs in my subconscious, I think, were contributing to how I was showing up in my life in relationships, whether it was friendships or romantic relationships. And the click there for me was, oh, shit. It's not necessarily that no one wants to get close to me. I'm also not letting anyone in. And then we start to see how sometimes a lot of what's going on in our life is almost like self-fulfilling prophecy. And if we want to talk about this in neurobiology terms, it's something called the subconscious bias. Whatever the beliefs are in our subconscious, our brain really is just looking for information that confirms those beliefs. So if I have a belief that it's not safe to be known, or I don't deserve to be known, I'm almost going to unconsciously be attracting relationships that confirm those beliefs. So that's one small example of course, my brain wants me to have friends. My brain wants me to have community and socialization and connection. But because of these beliefs that have been created in such a important time in my life, that didn't feel like something that was safe to do. And it also didn't feel like something I was deserving of. And once I was able to identify those and clear those from my mind, I started to be able to, number one, attract, and I mean, it was actually crazy. The people that I just started kind of magnetically coming to me and showing up that just felt so aligned. But then the second piece of it is that I noticed I was able to, with so much more ease, show up as my authentic self without that fear, without holding back. And so I attracted in a lot of new relationships, but then also some of the relationships that already existed were able to become so much deeper out of clearing those old limiting subconscious beliefs.
That's incredible. And that goes back to like the protection piece where you're not getting the outcome that you want, but it is still from a place of your subconscious protecting you. And then changing that. And then look what happened. If you don't mind me asking, when you first found EVOX, how many sessions did you start with? And then is it something that you still do? Is it something ongoing, or like, tell me how you personally, how you used it?
Yeah. When I was going through the cancer treatments, I was using it on a weekly basis for a few months.
Okay.
Even from the first session, though, it was so impactful for me. And then, of course, once I purchased the technology myself and I now have it, I still do it on a weekly basis. And in fact, in 2020, this will be really fun for anyone who's interested. In 2020, I committed to doing an EVOX session every single week. And I recorded a podcast episode for almost every session I did. That's on my website for anyone who's interested in looking into it. But basically, I just was putting it out there of what I was working through and how I was using EVOX to work through the patterns I still felt stuck in and the subconscious beliefs. And it was unbelievably impactful to do EVOX every single week for a year. And of course, I have access to this technology for free. But that commitment really came out of the whole year of 2021, launching the business. I actually almost didn't do EVOX at all. And so finally I was like, okay, come on. You have this technology. You have to use it for yourself. And so that's really what the commitment was. Although I've always had my own emotional wellness practice that includes many other things like journaling and meditation. But again, that EVOX piece, it just allows the shifts to happen so quickly. But in the context of clients, which I think might be helpful too, the way that I like to approach it with clients is I prefer to get really clear on something super specific that we want to shift. Whether it's I want to shift this pattern or whether it's I want clarity on this topic. So there's a clear goal in mind. And ideally, I like to continue doing EVOX sessions until that goal has been achieved. And usually that is about 1 to 2 months, maybe 3 months. If it's something really deep seated and maybe there's some trauma involved there, it might be a little bit longer. So that's the way that I like to approach it is, and after a month, 2 months, 3 months, when we've cleared that pattern, then it's up to the client to go, hey, do I want to take a break from this? Is there another pattern I want to shift into now and start working through and maybe start a new series of EVOX on this new pattern? That's how I tend to look at it. But then I also have, for example, I have my EVOX membership, which is for those individuals who maybe they've done a few rounds of intensives where they've done an EVOX on a weekly basis for a few months. And now they're in a little bit more of a maintenance phase where it's like, I just want to check in once a month. I want to make sure that there's not any emotional buildup. Each month I can check in, I can do my EVOX session, clear out anything that's coming up. And then, hey, great, see you next month. We might give them some takeaways. So there's definitely a lot of different options. I don't think there's a right or wrong, but that's kind of the way I would look at it is there's the more like boom, let's go. I want to clear things. I'm doing it weekly for probably a couple weeks versus more maintenance phase. And just now this has become a tool in my toolkit. And I know what it is, and I know when I need it, and I can call upon it when I need it.
I love that as a wellness maintenance program, because we're still living our lives and things are still going to come up. We're always having new things being introduced that could be something we need to work on or look at. So I love that you offer that membership as kind of a maintenance for your mental health, like just ongoing. I love that. So tell us a little, and obviously there's the technology is so amazing, but you clearly are just so passionate and have so much care and are so excellent at what you do. I could feel my session was so powerful because of you. So I would love for you to share where people can find you and like what you offer. I know you talked about the membership, but can tell us a little bit more about that. So people can, I have a lot of listeners in Southern California, and you're right here in Southern Orange County. So share where they can find you.
Yes. Okay. So my office is in Dana Point, California. I do remote sessions. So and there's a little bit of tech involved for those who would like to do EVOX remotely. And I can send you a link, or just go to the website and find EVOX remote. And there's a bunch of information there. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram. You can follow my personal page, which is at Leigh Ann Lindsey. You can also follow the business page, which is at the Accrescent. I'll give you those because no one knows how to spell the Accrescent, and that's my
I'll
fault
link all of it. Yeah.
for choosing a difficult name. And then of course, you can just go to theaccrescent.com, and that's where all the really in-depth information is. And I also have my own podcast where there's tons and tons of episodes on EVOX. Like I said, there's a whole year's worth of episodes on my own EVOX healing journey. There's some client testimonial episodes on the podcast. So lots and lots of information there. But yes, what I'll just add to that is, yeah, I think there's kind of a framework for if this is something that's piquing your interest, you can kind of expect, yeah, if this is something I try and it's really resonating, you might expect to do 4 to 8 sessions in the beginning, working on something really specific. And once we've cleared that, then you can assess again, okay, is there a new thing I want to pivot to? Or do I want to go in maintenance mode and maybe just use the monthly membership to check in? The last thing I'll say though is, because for remote clients, because there's some technology involved and the startup cost can be a little bit more, this is why I just recently introduced my neuro-transformational life coaching, because this is still one-on-one, but there's no technology needed, which I'm super excited about, because there's so many people, I think, especially remotely, who would love to work with the Accrescent and be a part of this, but the technology of EVOX piece is a little bit of a barrier for them. And so it's very much all of the same things. We're identifying what are the patterns I'm stuck in. We're starting to piece out what are the subconscious barriers keeping me stuck. It's just minus that EVOX technology piece, which I think it makes it a little bit more accessible. And for someone who's maybe interested in getting to know me better and seeing if they want to work with me, the life coaching could be a great starting point. So I'll say that, but of course, get on the website, explore, learn a little bit more. And absolutely, if there's any questions that come up for anyone, definitely reach out, shoot me an email or a DM on Instagram, whatever you prefer. I'm super happy to answer any questions too.
That's terrific. And I'll link all of this in my show notes. And I highly recommend the sessions. I highly recommend EVOX. And I'm excited to see where it takes me, because I'm new to my journey. So I'm going to continue. And I think it's just incredible. You are amazing. So I'm so happy. Like, I found you, I found your podcast, and listen to her podcast too. That is also a great resource. And just so happy that you were here today to share all of this. I appreciate it so much.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for being so gung-ho and willing to try something new, and, giving me a platform to share about this modality, share my message a little bit. I'm so grateful. You're so fun, and you're such a joy to work with.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please subscribe and review so we can reach more people who want to learn to glow alongside us. See you next time.